Billionaire sees a blind girl playing piano in the street, then hears a melody his dead wife wrote. Alexander Hart adjusted his silk tie, the knot feeling tighter than usual. The New York City air was thick with the promise of a summer storm, the humidity mirroring the cloying unease that had settled in his chest. He glanced at his reflection in the polished brass door of the Hart Music Building. His own name, emblazoned in elegant script, seemed to mock him. He was a titan of the music industry, a billionaire who could conjure symphonies with a phone call, yet he felt utterly empty. He'd been walking, a habit he'd adopted in recent years. The anonymity of the city, the press of bodies, the cacophony of sounds. It was a distraction, a temporary reprieve from the silence of his penthouse apartment, a silence that screamed Emily's absence. 15 years. 15 years since a sudden heart attack had stolen his vibrant, brilliant wife, leaving him adrift in a sea of success that tasted like ashes. He turned the corner onto Bleecker Street, the village's bohemian spirit, a stark contrast to the sterile formality of his midtown office. Street performers were a common sight here, and usually Alexander barely registered them. He was too lost in his own internal soundtrack of regrets and what-ifs. But today, something was different. A piano. An old, slightly battered upright, tucked into a small alcove next to a vintage bookstore. And sitting at the piano was a girl, perhaps 13 or 14, her head bent in concentration. She was slight, with a cascade of dark, unruly curls that framed a face Alexander couldn't quite see. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped him. It was the music. The melody that flowed from her slender fingers was delicate, haunting, a bittersweet waltz that resonated deep within him. It was a tune he hadn't heard in 15 years, a melody that had existed only in the private world he and Emily had shared. It was her song, a song she'd composed, a lullaby she'd hummed to him on sleepless nights, a piece of her soul poured into music, a piece that had never been written down, never recorded, never shared with the world. Alexander froze, his breath caught in his throat. His heart, usually a dull, steady drum, hammered against his ribs. He felt a dizzying rush of emotions, disbelief, grief, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He took a hesitant step closer, then another, drawn to the music like a moth to a flame. The girl continued to play, her eyes closed, seemingly lost in the world of the melody. As he got closer, Alexander could see that her eyes were unfocused, a milky white film obscuring their color. She was blind. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. A blind girl, playing a song that only he and Emily should know. It was impossible. It was a miracle. The song ended, the last notes fading into the city's hum. The girl sat for a moment, her hands resting lightly on the keys. Then, she turned her head slightly, as if sensing his presence. "Hello," she said, her voice soft, a little hesitant. Alexander cleared his throat, his voice raspy. That song you were playing. Where did you learn it?" The girl smiled, a small, shy smile that lit up her face. "My mother used to sing it to me, every night before I went to sleep." "Your mother?" Alexander's mind raced. "What was your mother's name?" "Sarah," the girl replied. Sarah Miller. The name meant nothing to him. He'd known hundreds, maybe thousands, of people in his life, but Sarah Miller wasn't one of them. And where did your mother learn this song?" He pressed, his voice trembling slightly. "Clara." He learned her name a moment later, tilted her head, a thoughtful expression on her face. "She never really said. She just told me it was a special song, a secret song. She said it always made her feel peaceful." Alexander felt a lump forming in his throat. Emily's song, a secret song, a source of peace. It was all too much, too surreal. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That song, it was written by my wife. A long time ago." Clara's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Really? It's so beautiful. Your wife must have been very talented." "She was," Alexander said, his voice barely a whisper. "She was the most talented person I ever knew." He paused, then asked the question that had been burning in his mind since he'd first heard the melody. "Clara, when did your mother pass away?" Clara's smile faded. 5 years ago, she said softly. She had cancer. 5 years. That meant Sarah had been alive for 10 years after Emily's death. 10 years during which she'd sung Emily's song to her daughter. But how? How had she learned it? Alexander felt a desperate need to know, to unravel this impossible mystery. He knelt down beside the piano, his gaze level with Clara's. "Clara," he said, "I need to know more about your mother. Would you be willing to talk to me about her?" Clara hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay," she said, "but can I play you another song first?" Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Of course," he said. "Please do." And as Clara's fingers danced across the keys, launching into another, equally haunting melody, Alexander knew that his life had just changed irrevocably. This girl, this blind musician, this keeper of Emily's lost song, was somehow connected to his past, to his grief, and perhaps to his future. The coffee shop was bustling, a typical New York mix of hurried professionals and leisurely tourists. Alexander had chosen it for its proximity to Bleecker Street, a neutral ground where he and Clara could talk. He'd ordered her a hot chocolate, remembering his own daughter, lost to him in a custody battle years before Emily, had loved the sweet drink. He himself nursed a black coffee, the bitterness a familiar companion. Clara sat across from him, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. She seemed remarkably calm, considering the circumstances. Alexander, on the other hand, felt a whirlwind of emotions churning inside him. "So," he began, trying to keep his voice steady, "you said your mother's name was Sarah Miller. Do you know what she did for a living?" "She was a nurse," Clara replied. "She worked at a Metropolitan General Hospital." Metropolitan General. The name struck a chord. That was the hospital where Emily had died. A wave of grief washed over Alexander, so intense it almost took his breath away. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to compose himself. He saw Emily, vibrant and laughing, her red hair a fiery halo around her head. He remembered the day they met, a chance encounter at a music festival in Central Park. He remembered their whirlwind romance, their wedding, their years of happiness. He remembered the crushing weight of the doctor's words. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hart. There was nothing we could do." He opened his eyes, forcing himself back to the present. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse, "did your mother ever mention my wife?" "Emily Hart." Clara frowned slightly. "I don't think so. But she did talk about a patient she cared for a long time ago. A woman who was very sick. She said this woman was a musician, and that she used to sing to her." A musician. Singing. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was almost too painful to bear. "Did she say anything else about this woman?" Alexander asked, his voice trembling. Clara thought for a moment. "She said the woman gave her a song. A special song, just for her. She said it was to thank her for being so kind. The song. Emily's song. Given to a kind nurse as a final gift." A wave of emotion so powerful swept through Alexander, he had to clench his fist to avoid tears. He had spent years thinking Emily had taken that melody to her grave, but it had survived. "Clara, your mother, was she working the night shift, by any chance?" Clara was a little surprised by the detail of the question. "Yes, I believe so. She always talked about the quiet of the hospital at night." He started thinking about Emily and how she was in the hospital. Emily had always been terrified of hospitals. The sterile smell, the hushed whispers, the constant reminder of mortality, it all unnerved her. But when the chest pains started, sharp and insistent, she knew she couldn't ignore them any longer. Alexander had rushed her to Metropolitan General, his heart pounding with fear. The emergency room was a blur of activity, but Emily seemed strangely calm. She held his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't worry, Alex," she'd said, her voice a little shaky. "I'll be fine. Just a little indigestion, probably." But it wasn't indigestion. It was a massive heart attack, a silent killer that had been lurking in her arteries for years. The doctors worked frantically, but it was too late. Emily's heart, the heart that had beat with so much love and music, stopped beating. The days that followed were a blur of grief and disbelief. Alexander moved through the world like a ghost, numb to everything but the aching emptiness inside him. He arranged the funeral, a small, private affair attended only by close friends and family. He sorted through Emily's belongings, each item a painful reminder of what he had lost. He found her notebooks, filled with lyrics and musical notations. But the song, the lullaby, wasn't there. He'd always assumed she'd kept in her head a secret melody just for them. He never imagined she'd shared it with anyone else. And he had thrown himself into work with renewed fervor. Building his empire had numbed the pain, and Emily always cheered him on. But the hole in his heart never truly healed. Back in the present, Alexander took a deep breath, pulling himself back to the small coffee shop. He explained to Clara about Emily's condition and the sudden nature of her death. "So, you see," he concluded, it's very possible that your mother was one of the nurses who cared for Emily in her final hours." Clara's eyes widened. "Wow," she said softly. That's amazing. And sad." "It is," Alexander agreed. "But it gives me a sense of peace. To know that Emily's song lived on, that it brought comfort to someone else." "My mom loved that song," Clara said. "She said it reminded her of hope, of the good in people." Alexander smiled, a bittersweet smile. "That sounds like Emily," he said. "She always saw the good in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves." He looked at Clara, at her earnest face, her gentle spirit. He felt a connection to her, a bond forged by a shared love for a song and a shared loss. He knew he couldn't just walk away. He needed to know more to understand the full story. "Clara," he said, I'd like to find out more about your mother's time at the hospital. Would you mind if I contacted them, asked some questions?" Clara hesitated. "I don't know," she said. "It was a long time ago, and I don't want to cause any trouble." "I understand," Alexander said, "but I promise I'll be discreet. I need to know. For Emily, and for myself." Clara looked at him, her blind eyes seeming to see right through him. She saw his grief, his loneliness, his desperate need for closure. "Okay," she said softly. "You can contact them. But can I come with you?" Alexander smiled. "Of course," he said. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Metropolitan General Hospital, 15 years later, was a different place. The bustling, chaotic emergency room Alexander remembered had been replaced by a sleek, modern reception area. The air still carried the faint scent of antiseptic, but it was overlaid with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee from a small cafe in the corner. Alexander, with Clara by his side, approached the information desk. He'd called ahead, explaining his situation to a sympathetic administrator who had promised to help. They were directed to a small, private office where a woman named MS. Johnson, the hospital's records manager, was waiting for them. MS. Johnson was a middle-aged woman with a kind face and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened patiently as Alexander explained his story, his voice occasionally catching with emotion. Clara sat quietly beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Mr. Hart, MS." Johnson said after he'd finished, "I understand this is a very personal matter, and I appreciate you coming to us. I've reviewed our records from that time period, and I believe I've found some information that may be relevant." She opened a thick file on her desk, its pages yellowed with age. "Sarah Miller," she said, reading from the file. She was a registered nurse, employed here from 1998 to 2008. She worked primarily on the night shift in the cardiac care unit. The cardiac care unit, the very place where Emily had spent her final hours. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. "Do the records indicate, did she have any specific patients she cared for?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. MS. Johnson scanned the pages. "There are patient logs, of course, but they don't provide a lot of detail. However," she said, pausing, "I did find a note in MS. Miller's personnel file. It's from her supervisor, a Dr. Evans. It mentions a commendation for her exceptional care and compassion for a patient named Emily Hart. Alexander closed his eyes, a wave of emotion washing over him. It was confirmation, undeniable proof that Sarah Miller had known Emily, had cared for her, had heard her song. "Dr. Evans," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Is he still here?" "MS." Johnson shook her head. "I'm afraid not. Dr. Evans retired several years ago. He passed away last year." Another dead end. Alexander felt a surge of frustration. He was so close, yet so far from understanding the full story. "Are there any other nurses," he asked, "who worked with MS Miller on a night shift back then? Anyone who might remember her? Or Emily? MS." Johnson thought for a moment. "There were several," she said, "but most of them have moved on, retired, or passed away. It was a long time ago, Mr. Hart." She paused, then her eyes lit up. "Wait a minute," she said. "There is one name, a nurse named Helen Baker. She worked with Sarah for many years. I believe she's still alive, and I think she volunteers here in the gift shop." The gift shop, of all places. Alexander felt a flicker of hope. Could we speak to her?" he asked. "MS." Johnson smiled. "I don't see why not," she said. "Let me give her a call." A few minutes later, they were standing in the hospital gift shop, a brightly lit space filled with flowers, balloons, and stuffed animals. An elderly woman with a warm smile and twinkling eyes was arranging a display of greeting cards. This was Helen Baker, MS. Johnson made the introductions, explaining briefly why Alexander and Clara were there. Helen listened intently, her expression growing increasingly thoughtful. "Sarah Miller," she said, her voice a little shaky. "Oh, I remember Sarah. She was a wonderful nurse. So kind, so dedicated. Did you know anything about a patient she cared for?" Alexander asked, his heart pounding. "A woman named Emily Hart?" Helen's eyes widened. "Emily," she said softly. "Yes, I remember Emily. She was very special. Sarah was very fond of her." Alexander and Clara exchanged glances with each other, and a small smile crept onto both their faces. "Do you remember," Alexander continued, his voice trembling slightly, "anything about a song? A song that Emily might have sung to Sarah?" Helen's brow furrowed in concentration. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if searching through the corridors of her memory. Then she opened them, a spark of recognition in their depths. "Yes," she said, her voice hushed. "Yes, I do. It was a lullaby, I think. Sarah used to hum it sometimes in the break room. She said Emily had taught it to her. It was a beautiful melody, very soothing." Alexander felt a lump forming in his throat. He reached for Clara's hand, his grip tight. He could feel her trembling slightly, sharing in the intensity of the moment. "Helen," he said, his voice choked with emotion, Do you remember how it went? Could you hum it for us?" Helen hesitated. "It was a long time ago," she said. "I don't know if I can remember it perfectly." "Please," Alexander pleaded. "Anything you can remember. It would mean so much to us." Helen looked at Alexander, at his desperate expression, at Clara's hopeful face. She took a deep breath, then closed her eyes again. And then she began to hum. The melody was faint at first, hesitant, a little shaky. But as she continued, it grew stronger, clearer, more confident. It was Emily's song, the same delicate, haunting waltz that Alexander had heard Clara playing on the street. The same melody that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. Tears streamed down Alexander's face, tears of grief, of relief, of overwhelming gratitude. He squeezed Clara's hand, and he felt her squeeze back. They were connected, not just by the song, but by the shared experience of loss and the unexpected discovery of connection. Helen finished humming, her eyes still closed. When she opened them, they were filled with tears. "That's it," she said softly. "That's the song." Sarah said it was a gift. A gift from Emily. Alexander couldn't speak. He simply nodded, overwhelmed by emotion. He looked at Clara, her face radiant with a mixture of joy and sorrow. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. It's like It's like a piece of your wife is still here with us. Alexander nodded again, unable to articulate the profound sense of peace that was settling over him. Emily's song, a melody he thought had been lost forever, had been preserved, passed down through the kindness of a nurse to her daughter, and then, miraculously, back to him. "Helen," Alexander said, finally finding his voice, "thank you. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for sharing this with us." Helen smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "You're welcome, Mr. Hart," she said. "I'm glad I could help. Sarah, she would have wanted you to know. She always said that music could heal the deepest wounds." The three of them stood there for a moment, in the brightly lit gift shop, surrounded by the cheerful trinkets and the lingering echo of Emily's song. The sterile environment of the hospital, a place of so much pain and loss, had somehow become a sanctuary of healing and connection. As they left the hospital, walking out into the bright sunshine, Alexander felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of grief, though still present, was lessened, softened by the knowledge that Emily's spirit lived on, not just in his memory, but in the music she had shared with the world, in the kindness she had shown to others. He looked at Clara, walking beside him, her hand now resting comfortably in his. He saw not just a blind girl who played the piano, but a connection to his past, a bridge to his future, a symbol of hope and healing. "Clara," he said, "I don't know how to thank you for bringing this song back into my life, for helping me find this connection to Emily." Clara smiled. "You don't have to thank me," she said. I think your wife wanted us to find each other. I think she wanted you to hear her song again." Alexander nodded, a deep sense of conviction settling in his heart. He didn't believe in fate, not really, but he couldn't deny the extraordinary series of events that had brought him and Clara together. It was as if Emily, from beyond the grave, had orchestrated their meeting, had guided them to each other, had used her music to heal their broken hearts. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't just walk away, leave Clara to navigate the world alone. She needed him, and he, perhaps even more, needed her. "Clara," he said, his voice firm, resolute, I want to ask you something important." Clara stopped walking, turning her face towards him, her blind eyes filled with a quiet anticipation. "What is it?" she asked. Alexander took a deep breath. "I want you to come live with me," he said. I want to adopt you." Clara's initial reaction was one of stunned silence. She stood there, on the bustling New York sidewalk, the sounds of the city fading into a distant hum. Alexander's words echoed in her mind, unbelievable, yet strangely inevitable. "Adopt me?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. Alexander nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd rehearsed this moment in his head countless times, but now, facing the reality of it, he felt a surge of nervousness. He didn't want to pressure her, to overwhelm her. He just wanted her to know how much she meant to him. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said, his voice gentle. "And I don't expect you to answer right away. But I've been thinking about it ever since we met. Ever since I heard you play Emily's song." He explained how lonely he'd been since Emily's death, how he'd filled the emptiness with work, with material possessions, but nothing had truly filled the void. He told her about his estranged daughter, a painful chapter in his life that had left him with a deep longing for family. "You remind me of her in a way," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your spirit, your kindness, your love of music, and the song. The song connects us, Clara. It's a bridge between us, between my past and my future." Clara listened intently, her head tilted slightly, as if trying to see him through her unseeing eyes. She understood his loneliness. She'd felt it herself, ever since her mother had died. She'd lived with her aunt, a kind but distant woman who had struggled to cope with Clara's blindness and her own grief. "My aunt, she wouldn't mind," Clara said softly. She loves me, but she's getting older. She worries about me." Alexander nodded. "I understand," he said, "and I would of course talk to her. Make sure she's comfortable with the arrangement." He paused, then added, "Clara, I know I can't replace your mother. No one can. But I can offer you a home, a family, a life filled with love and music. I can give you the opportunities you deserve, the chance to pursue your passion." He thought of his vast apartment, filled with silence and empty rooms. He imagined it filled with Clara's music, with her laughter, with the warmth of a family. He imagined teaching her about Emily, sharing stories, keeping her memory alive. Clara took a deep breath, then a small smile touched her lips. "You have a piano, right?" she asked. Alexander chuckled, a wave of relief washing over him. "I have several," he said, "including a Steinway Grand, just like Emily's. And you wouldn't mind if I played it?" Clara asked, her voice a little hesitant. "Mine," Alexander exclaimed. "I would encourage it. I want you to play, Clara. I want to hear your music, Emily's music, fill my home." Clara's smile widened. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, I'll come live with you." The legal process of adoption was surprisingly smooth. Alexander's wealth and influence undoubtedly played a role, but Clara's aunt, relieved to know her niece would be well cared for, offered no resistance. She met with Alexander, saw his genuine affection for Clara, and gave her blessing. The first few weeks were a period of adjustment for both of them. Clara had to navigate a new home, a new city, a new life. Alexander had to learn how to be a father again, how to care for a teenager, a blind teenager, with her own unique needs and challenges. But music was their constant companion, their bridge of understanding. Clara spent hours at the Steinway, her fingers dancing across the keys, filling the apartment with the melodies of Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, and of course, Emily's song. Alexander would sit and listen, often with tears in his eyes, feeling closer to Emily than he had in years. He started sharing stories about her, about their life together, about her passion for music. Clara listened intently, absorbing every detail, building a picture in her mind of the woman who had written the song that had brought them together. Clara enrolled in a specialized school for visually impaired students, where she excelled in music, Braille, and other subjects. Alexander hired a tutor to help her with her studies, and he made sure she had access to the best resources and opportunities. He also took her to concerts, to museums, to Broadway shows, exposing her to the world of art and culture that he loved. He described everything to her, painting vivid pictures with his words, helping her to see the world through his eyes. Clara, in turn, taught Alexander how to see the world in a different way. She taught him to appreciate the sounds, the smells, the textures of everyday life. She taught him to listen, truly listen, not just to music but to the people around him. Their bond deepened with each passing day. They shared meals, laughter, and tears. They talked about everything and nothing. They became, in every sense of the word, a family. One evening, as Clara was playing Emily's song, Alexander sat beside her on the piano bench. He placed his hand gently on her back, feeling the vibrations of the music through her body. "Clara," he said, his voice soft, "I've been thinking about the song, about Emily's song." Clara stopped playing, turning her head towards him. "What about it?" she asked. "It's never been published," Alexander said. "It's only ever existed in our memories, in your mother's heart, in your fingers." He paused, then added, I think Emily would have wanted it to be shared with the world. I think she would have wanted others to hear its beauty, to feel its message of hope." Clara nodded slowly. "I think you're right," she said. "But how?" Alexander smiled. "I have some connections," he said, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "I think I can arrange for it to be recorded, published, perhaps even performed." And so he did. He contacted a renowned composer and arranger, a friend of his, and commissioned him to create an orchestral arrangement of Emily's song. He hired a world-class orchestra and a talented young vocalist to record it. The recording was a masterpiece. The melody, simple yet profound, soared with the full power of the orchestra, the vocalist's voice capturing the haunting beauty of Emily's composition. Alexander arranged for the song to be released on the anniversary of Emily's death. It was an instant success. Radio stations played it, critics raved about it, and people all over the world were moved by its beauty and its story. Clara, of course, was the first to hear the finished recording. Alexander played it for her in his home studio, holding her hand as they listened together. Tears streamed down Clara's face as the music filled the room. It was her mother's song, Emily's song, their song, now shared with the world. "It's beautiful," she whispered. It's like she's here with us." Alexander nodded, his own eyes filled with tears. "She is Clara," he said. "She is." The success of Emily's song brought a new level of attention to Alexander and Clara. They were interviewed on television, featured in magazines, and invited to attend prestigious events. Clara, initially shy and hesitant, blossomed under the spotlight. She spoke eloquently about her mother, about Emily, about the power of music to heal and connect. Alexander, meanwhile, found himself embracing a new role, not just as a music mogul, but as a father, an advocate for the visually impaired, and a champion of lost and forgotten melodies. He established a foundation in Emily's name dedicated to supporting young musicians and promoting music education. The adoption had become official, and Clara legally changed her last name to Hart. It was a formality in many ways, as they had long since felt like father and daughter. But it was a symbolic moment, a public affirmation of their bond. Their life together wasn't always easy. There were challenges, adjustments, misunderstandings. Clara, like any teenager, had her moments of rebellion, her struggles with identity and independence. Alexander, still grappling with his own grief and his past mistakes, sometimes stumbled in his role as a father. But they always found their way back to each other, guided by their shared love, their mutual respect, and the enduring power of Emily's song. The music was their anchor, their constant reminder of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. Years passed. Clara graduated from high school with honors, then went on to study music at a prestigious conservatory. She became a gifted pianist, composer, and performer, her talent recognized and celebrated around the world. Alexander watched her grow, his heart filled with pride and a bittersweet sense of wonder. He saw Emily in her, not just in her musical talent, but in her spirit, her kindness, her resilience. He never remarried. He'd loved Emily too deeply, too completely, to ever imagine sharing his life with another woman. But he wasn't lonely. He had Clara, his daughter, his family, his new harmony. One evening, Clara was giving a concert at Carnegie Hall. It was a sold-out performance, the culmination of years of hard work and dedication. Alexander sat in the audience, his heart swelling with pride as he watched her take the stage. She played a variety of pieces, showcasing her virtuosity and her range. But the final piece, the encore, was the one that brought the audience to its feet. It was Emily's song, the lullaby that had started all. Clara played it with a depth of emotion, a passion that transcended mere technical skill. It was a tribute to her mother, to Emily, to the enduring power of love and music. As the final notes faded away, the audience erupted in thunderous applause. Clara stood, bowing, her face radiant with joy and gratitude. Alexander, tears streaming down his face, rose to his feet, applauding along with everyone else. He knew, in that moment, that he had found his purpose. He had found his peace. He had found his family. He had found a new harmony, a melody of love and hope that would resonate through the rest of his days. He looked up to the sky as he mouthed "thank you" to the heavens, thankful to his late wife and the twists and turns of fate that had brought him and Clara together. And somewhere, in the ethereal realm beyond, Emily smiled, knowing that her song, her love, lived on,